Okay, I'll admit, I know I'm a little bit late considering Secrets of the Storm dropped like way long ago, but I think now that the game has been updated a bunch, I think it's time that I actually give you guys my first impressions to this music. I think we're just going to go through all of them and you're just going to see what I think about them. And right here was the moment that I almost made the biggest mistake of my YouTube career. Okay, not actually, I'm being really dramatic, but let me walk you through some history. You know, at first I was hesitant to talk about this soundtrack for two main reasons. The first one being that the reviews were just abysmal. And the second being that I noticed that the first two songs that I reviewed way back then were relying a lot on the placid place of ignorance motif. And while I really loved the songs when hearing them, I couldn't help but feel like they were a little over-reliant on that motif, and given the fact that I wasn't actually playing the game due to, again, the reviews, I didn't get that much time to really resonate with the music. I'll also admit that much like with Ultra Kill Layer 7, I was a little concerned that I wasn't going to absolutely love this music, and maybe hearing the placid place of ignorance motif kind of pushed me away from the music at the time. That said, plenty of updates came around, the game became a lot less buggy, and people generally had a more positive outlook on the DLC like 2 to 3 weeks after the fact, so I finally bought the DLC to see what the big deal was about. Even after the fact, I still hadn't played the game much because I like playing games with my friends and they were all busy with college and shit, so I kinda just had the DLC sitting around in my Steam library collecting virtual dust, but somehow it seems like just the activation energy of simply paying Gearbox some more money gave me the push that I needed to go out of my way to at least listen to the album one full time so that I could get like some half-assed reaction video out, and then I filmed like 6 minutes of that reaction video, which went something like this. And so, of course, I scrapped it, deciding that I'm actually going to pay this portion of the OST the respect that it deserves by giving it all of my creative effort, just like with the first Risk of Rain video that I did, and just like I did with Ultra Kill Layer 7. I was intent on being a lot more in tune with the music this time than I was with my other projects that I've worked on thus far. And as it turns out, the best way to do that is to just listen to the music all the time, because it fucking bangs. Normally for some soundtracks, I have to like deliberately make myself listen to it, because it doesn't really fit within my normal genres, therefore it doesn't really make its way into my rotation very often. But with the Secrets of the Storm soundtrack, I would almost go on autopilot and just shuffle the soundtrack whenever I had somewhere to be, whenever I had to make a drive somewhere. And this is really one of the few times where I can say that the love for the music as a casual listener kept me hooked, even when the music nerd in me might not have been in commission to write about it. Maybe it's the collaborative effort between Chris, Stavros, George Karagiannis, and Chris's brother Kostis. Maybe it's the sheer ballsy moves that were taken with many of these tracks. Maybe it's the fact that this soundtrack could very well be the last one for an incredibly long time for a beloved IP such as this. Maybe it's the fact that I also gave Chris more money to buy the albums on Bandcamp, and I now have all the stems for these songs, so I can more easily break down each song piece by piece. But whatever it is, I've rambled on long enough, and we've still got 9 fucking pages of script to get to, so we should probably get moving. Oh, and another quick thing, since the first 3 songs in this video were already out by the time my original video dropped, it meant that at the time I only had like 11 or so hours to collectively listen to them, analyze them, and write about them, because at that point I was like 80% done with the video and really didn't have that kind of time, so you're gonna get redone analyses on these songs. I still can't get over the comment left on the video for this song that reads, "Of course sometimes it doesn't rain. It's called Risk of Rain, not Guaranteed Rain," which at this point now has over 1.7 thousand likes, which further proves my point that it's still a pretty funny comment. I'd also like to issue a retraction from my first analysis of this song, how I tried tying the name of the song to the potential that Chris would just hand off this project to another composer. It's almost like I forgot that Chris also just pulls a lot of his song titles from pop culture references, and while I think the references themselves don't really mean anything to me personally, it was a little silly for me to assume that Chris would just hand off this IP's work to another person, just because one guy happened to compose a single other song on the album. I also wanted to touch on another thing that I barely mentioned in the first video. Chris deliberately wanted to incorporate more acoustic drums in the Risk of Rain 2 soundtrack because he thought that the key needed to increase energy levels compared to Risk of Rain 1 was the acoustic drums. And to be clear, he was entirely right, but I have to say the application of those drums feels a hell of a lot better in this soundtrack. It could have something to do with the soundscape feeling a lot more acoustic, it could have something to do with the environments feeling a lot more bright and lively, or it could just be my new music bias kicking in. At this point, I'm going to immediately tie basically everything new in this game to The False Sun after watching like one video on the guy, where I previously spoke of this song acting like a new genesis of sorts. Now, additional context has led me to a greater feeling of certain survivor groups acquiring newfound knowledge on this prophetic entity that was previously unheard of, likely due to their captivity, and now it's time for a journey through new lands to find them. That classic Chris Christodoulou sliding synth is back, playing its fair rounds of the Risk of Rain motif, and then we let the piano take the main stage. I still definitely feel a bit of that mysterious vibe, but again, right now I'm just gonna kind of chalk it up to not being very familiar with the stages yet, so that sense of mystery reflects my own habit of just getting lost as hell on some of these stages. Maybe not Verdant Falls specifically, but I am still kind of learning my way around these places. We're only on the first song in this soundtrack, but I really have to give some massive credit to the freestyling that goes on in this soundtrack. There's just a certain level of emotion that I can feel within these riffs, more than I could feel for basically anything else in the base game soundtrack or Survivors of the Void, and it hits really hard within the context that this is likely to be our last novel experience with this game's music for quite a while. I'm a person who tends to sing a lot of lead melodies being played in songs and instrumentals more than I am to sing actual vocals in other songs, so to hear this synth go from really high to really low not only is really fun, but also does a lot of weird character changes with the synth itself and makes it sound a lot more different than what I'm used to, and I find that really enjoyable. The only thing I can't really wrap my head around is why they decided to just leave like a minute and a half of the ping-ponging synth at the end. I guess you can just skip it, and I'm almost certain that this isn't a result of like a delay plugin going haywire and accidentally leaving like 90 seconds of dead air during the export process, but it's still fairly odd nonetheless. One of the new core sounds that we get to indulge ourselves in is this chunky guitar that plays over many of the parts that you'd expect to hear a regular guitar play in, and I think you can basically classify it as a part of the metaphorical sound font of this soundtrack. Now is also probably a good time to mention that Chris himself said that he took a lot of influence from progressive rock for making these pieces, and while I don't really know what differentiates prog rock from regular rock from dad rock or whatever the fuck, I can very much feel its influence throughout this album. I'm also noticing a trend here with the drums playing in an almost identical rhythm to the guitar or whatever the main instrument is, and this makes for a very rhythmically intense listening session sometimes. In my previous analysis, I called these guitars happy, hopeful, and uplifting, and that is kind of still the sentiment that I've carried throughout all of my time listening to this album, which I think both fits with the sound character of the DLC itself, as well as makes the upcoming part just that much more unexpected and frankly batshit insane. I'd also like to note that my reserved reaction to the self-proclaimed anime-ass part is not indicative of my feelings on it, but rather because I didn't know how I could say I air drum this part in my car whenever it comes on, which puts me at greater risk of crashing, without potentially getting myself in trouble. The sliding synth is back, it's playing that Risk of Rain motif again, and it's shifting up and down to a few different pitches, which could be seen as just another motif that maybe gets overused a little bit, but also I have a feeling that most people aren't going to notice that because you'd basically only have the motif enjoyers being the ones who even realize that there is a motif to be referencing. That and the fact that, again, the Risk of Rain motif is sprinkled everywhere in these 3 albums, and a ton of them are so well placed that you won't even realize they're there. Here's our first introduction to George Karagiannis' mad fucking guitar skills. And I'd just like to put this out there into the world that this man nearly hard carries this album. I of course love all the work being done by all the parties involved, and there is no bad song in this soundtrack in my personal opinion, but the work that George put into his guitar work turned this album into something truly incredible. Maybe one of the only things that sucks about this song is that if you're simply too good at the teleporter event, you finish up before you even hear the sick fucking... Breakdown isn't really the right word, like the opposite of a breakdown. I think I will use this song to shit all over my previous self and how his lack of listening to the music made for, frankly, poor judgment. Initially, I described the opening of this song as using sounds from the Survivors of the Void sound palette, and while I still very much hear the whoops, I also finally, pinned a sound to the other parts of this opening. A lot of the ambient stuff sounds tribal, much like someone hitting a large hollow singing bowl to get that gong sounding effect. I didn't speak on much else in this intro the first time around, and I really underappreciated these wooden percussion hits. They don't literally sound like fragments of the song that is to come, but they are a solid build-up to the chunkening. I will still agree with the aforementioned mild doom sounding influence, the jagged edges, and the tuned down guitar sound. And in addition, I'll also give you the interesting 7/4 rhythm and the weird offset drum placement, leading to it feeling like one of the beats is just straight up missing. While a lot of the drum work in this song is very simple, the intricacies come in the form of these really weird clicky perks and hi-hats that come up in the middle of each phrasing, which aids in a feeling of tactileness in the music. Maybe the only thing I have contention with is the fact that this song doesn't sound much like anything else that plays as a regular stage theme. But I'd prefer this song to play as a stage theme than anything else that might fit the vibe more but might be worse and also isn't this song. This song actually helps showcase an interesting thing that I've started to notice with this soundtrack, which is the fact that you can find tons of examples of the placid place of ignorance motif, but it no longer takes away from these songs like I was initially concerned about, mainly because there are so many interesting, unique, and new things that each of these songs present that make them stand out as their own track that simply take inspiration from another great song in this series. The switch up is here, and it is dirty. The guitar is incredibly gritty, the groove is very set in stone, and it does not miss a beat. These short phrases in the guitar pockets make for an interesting shift from said set in stone groove and make the song just that much more interesting. I I mentioned that I was going to absolutely clown my former self because I originally said, I can feel how much different this song feels compared to compositions by Chris. No the fuck I can't. The guitar might be repetitive, but there's so much other cool shit going on while the guitars are doing their thing, and for me to just ignore those things because the guitars are the most forward-facing thing is just disrespectful, even if I liked the song when I was saying all this stuff. Maybe this makes it sound like I'm glazing the fuck out of the music or the game or the composers or whatever, and frankly, if that's the case, so fucking be it. God forbid a man enjoy a thing in life, good God. I guess I should probably clarify exactly what I meant when I said, no the fuck I couldn't tell the difference between the feeling in this composition and Chris's compositions. If Chris was to have just uploaded this and I didn't know that Severus's name was attached to it, I would have just not thought of anything. I would have just been like, alright, cool, it's another thing. It's just another song in the album. But because Stavros's name was stapled on it, for good reason, because he is the one who composed the damn thing, I was like, oh, I can feel the differences between Stavros's composition and Chris's composition. If that was just released and I was just none the wiser and I didn't notice, I would not have said anything. I'm being blinded by my own intellect in thinking that I could just detect the differences between these two things, when I can promise you I'm not actually that smart and I'm not that in tune with the music to know that. I don't even have anything witty to say here. The guitars and the drums are immediately moving in tandem with one another, and it does a lot of cool things here. It creates just one whole solid body of a song. Like the two pieces are kind of glued together, and that syncopated rhythm of both of these pieces actually makes it hard for me to keep time or remember what time signature the song is in. I always assumed that it was somewhere around the 3/4 range or the 7/4 range or whatever, but then I remember that the song is in 4/4, and I feel like I overthought my way into just being stupid again. I'm a simple man, and this guitar sweep is fun. I like it, so I'm putting it in the video. The batshit insane synth is back with its weird rhythms, but now the drums are a bit more set in stone, which makes the groove easier to follow, and now there's this interesting theme of escalating intensity in each subsequent part of the song. This portion right here features the same syncopated rhythm throughout, but the drums are slowly morphing to become more and more high octane before we move on to the next portion of this song, the smooth portion. During the downtime, we switch from the aggressive synth to the guitar, once again played by George, and this section, as well as other sections like it, just sound a lot smoother than the leads being played before it. I don't really have a strong preference either which way, but every time I get to these portions of these songs, I get the same sense of smoothness. This smoothness is only mildly joined by some additional guitars that you almost wouldn't notice are there if they weren't doing kind of their own crazy bends and shit to break up what's happening in the foreground. For the final section, we have a new rhythm and drums that have an even more erratic pattern, which I didn't think was possible. But it ultimately builds up to what I just mentioned about escalating intensity. Each passing guitar phrase starts off with a similar riff, before going and just kind of freestyling their way to the next passing phrase, and then becoming increasingly more erratic, more tappy, more off-rhythm. The original passing phrase and its subsequent build-up reflect the additional rising tensions from fighting one of the bosses on these stages. They become more erratic because you're on a timer, and you simply have more important places to be than wherever you're at right now. This ending absolutely kicks ass, and reminds me of the ending of the Monsoon trailer announcement themes, with that constant repeating of the same phrase, jumping octaves and shit to really push home that final phrase before just ending the song. People have asked me for years, and by years I mean like maybe a year, where I get some of my background music from. And to no surprise, I usually make it myself. A lot of the intros you hear for these types of videos and a lot of the outros are music that are made by me. More specifically, they are from my newest project, Fabrications of Reality, a 19-track list of a bunch of background songs. Not only does it include such bangers as the intro for all of my videos, Something Helpful, or the outro for more of my videos, A Coffee Will Do, but it also includes the highly sought after Absolute Zero Lo-Fi remix from Deep Rock Galactic, as well as some of my favorite Rhodes piano masterpieces. It encompasses a lot of different things, a lot of different vibes, a lot of different emotions, and you're probably going to be hearing a lot of those throughout a lot of these projects, and this is where you can go find all of them if you want to listen to them in the background while you go do your own things. Another motif has been established, and I think it technically belongs to part one of this trilogy of songs. I like the subtle strumming guitar in the background, because after hearing the whole song for the first time and then coming back to this part, it really helps solidify the kind of vibe that was captured by They Might As Well Be Dead, in a way. When I hear that sort of low brass sounding thing at the beginning of this song, it always kind of transports me to some fictional place where you're discovering a place deep underground. You're pressing some button that you probably didn't realize was a button, and you're watching as this massive Goliath of a statue comes out of the ground, and it's only then that you realize that there used to be a civilization here. Another thing that the soundtrack does really well is that despite using the Placid Place of Ignorance motif, they still at least did some interesting stuff with its rhythm, with the instrument choices, and obviously changing all of those things at least gives the song a different feel than the original song that they pulled the motif from. It's also helpful that they've developed another motif to sprinkle throughout this soundtrack. All in all, the first half of this song has an incredibly chill vibe to it. It doesn't really put too much on the listener. You just kind of listen to the Placid Place of Ignorance motif being played on a few different instruments. You hear the tablas playing, which kind of brings you back to one of the best songs in the game. And you hear a bass that might be a bass, or it might be a guitar playing the bass line, which sounds kind of weird when I say it, but the reason I say it is because it leads into this incredibly low energy section with the instrument in question suddenly sounding like a fucking trombone, and I'm going to refrain from talking about that trombone game. The other reason I can't tell if this was originally a bass or a guitar is because the high note kind of pinch sound, it almost sounds like something that a guitar could replicate, not necessarily something that a bass could replicate, but it would have been weird to just have a guitar playing the whole bass line, or I guess I assume it would be kind of weird. This portion feels like the calm before the storm, and my god, a storm has never sounded this fucking good. Think of everything I said about George's incredible guitar playing skills earlier, apply those here, and then we'll expand some more. Never before have I seen so much life be put into a motif that I thought was overdone. To be fair, that is kind of a ridiculously specific thing that I hadn't really felt in my life until right now, but the PPI motif just sounds incredible in this application. It sounds like it has its own need for longing. It still gives me chills when I listen to it, when I'm actively writing about it. Drums become, again, increasingly more complicated, and this song contains probably the most fun drums of any song, kind of like that controlled chaos thing I mentioned in my analysis on Disdrometer. This song is still going buck wild, and there's really no reason for it to stop doing that. The end of this song gives me similar vibes and feelings to what A Raindrop That Fell to the Sky gave me, where there was just so much put into the climax of the song that the final moments of this song almost make you feel out of breath in a way because of just how intense the previous couple of minutes were. I promise this isn't gonna be an opening bit for all of these songs, but this really is just to put into perspective how many fucking times this motif comes up. And at this point, I can almost say for a fact that this is a strictly PPI reference, because none of the songs that PPI takes inspiration from contain this motif, thus furthering my general confusion as to why it's everywhere in this soundtrack. The general tempo of this song, combined with the erratic drum fills, makes it sound like this song was on a strict timer that had to be met, so the song was recorded like 100 BPM faster than what was expected, but it wasn't fully slowed down. Either that or it sounds like they kind of just speed ran recording the track, like they were trying to get the best video game DLC OST any % world record or something like that. The PPI motif gets its own flavor with the guitar playing that phrasing, we can vaguely hear the Padme Hūṃ motif being played in the background, and this synth counter melody offers a nice call and response, while also finishing off the rest of the Padme Hūṃ motif. If I'm honest, I really can't say that any soundtrack has quite made my jaw drop as much as this switch up did in this song. I remember hearing it for the first time and kind of laughing like an insane asylum patient because I genuinely thought to myself, oh, he's getting real off the fucking rails with this shit. Also, this freeform jazz-inspired section kind of reminds me of the music that plays at the beginning of Gianni's Twitch streams, which I bring up not only because it's my fucking video, but also because I keep somehow finding ways to reference him in places that are not my Ultra Kill videos. I managed to find another thing that I love about this application of George's guitar playing, because not only is he killing it every step of the way, but the tone of the guitar sounds much different than guitars that were played by Chris in the game's past. And I think I like it so much because it feels like it's locked into a certain frequency range, much like the other elements of these songs, so everything has its own neat little place, and they all fit together like a really weird and metaphysical puzzle that would be very difficult to ask for as a gift. Well, I guess you could just ask for a vinyl of the music or something, I don't know. This is another part that I air drum instinctively, but this is much shorter, so it's not as much of a safety hazard. finger tapping portion adds to that thing I said earlier, where it's like if you theoretically had a finite, measurable amount of energy to put into a soundtrack. The first two albums used up about half of it, and this DLC album has a whole other 50% of energy that they get to play with, and god damn it, they're gonna use every last bit of it. I get that the idea was to have an incredible send-off since Chris has confirmed he's moving on to other things in life, and maybe that's just where I'm coming up with this bullshit. For the sake of pacing, I have to start at the low energy portion of this song, along with the fact that this is one of the few songs in the entire game to have a different phrasing between the game's release and the soundtrack release. Well, that and the lack of the guitar bending thing in Antarctic Oscillation, that was kind of a weird choice. I think this portion is really cool for this song, and having it loop on itself while you trek this absolute behemoth of a hike, while bosses are spawning in and you're trying to cleanse yourself of the debuffs and you're getting absolutely clowned on if you're a low mobility character, it really makes the rest of the song, coupled with the introduction of the false sun, feel that much more badass. He isn't nearly as brooding as Mithrix, the character that this whole game was built around you taking down, and he isn't nearly as much of an all-consuming threat like the Voidling is. He's kinda just some dickhead who inherited godlike powers and is abusing them like the dickhead that he... You know, on second thought, isn't that like what Mithrix and Providence were also kind of doing? The point is that he still feels like he's a much more down-to-earth kind of boss. He still very much has his own cult, and his inclusion also brought in a new elite type, the Gilded Enemy, indicating at least some level of power beyond that of the measly survivors. But this music almost feels like fighting your school bully who also managed to gain some kind of power. Powers that are stronger than yours, but ones that he doesn't fully know how to control yet, and still he's already managed to let it all get to his head, so you kind of have to just teach him a lesson. Since this fight operates in phases, the music loops and changes to fit around those phrases. And this portion of it with the guitar bending and shit furthers that idea of having so much power that you literally can't control it, and it becomes dangerous to all parties involved, including yourself. Then we go back to the double bass drum riff just for a little bit. And the final stretch of this song exudes the power of the survivors to take down this blatant abuser of their powers. And coupled with the increasing intensity of the guitar and the drums, exudes the true power of this character as they unleash everything they have to try and stop those who are trying to quote-unquote take away their powers, being truly ignorant to just how much destruction they're causing. One thing I'm surprised I totally neglected to mention is the fact that this portion right here is a 7/4 to 6/4 transition phase. And the only reason I bring it up is because I know in previous Ultra Kill videos, when I would talk about these like compound time signature changes, I would refer to them as the sum of their parts. So like a 12/4 and an 11/4. That's like technically real, but not enough to matter. This is a 7/4 and 6/4 transition thing, and that's cool. The final section of this song ditches the 7/4 to 6/4 rhythm in favor of what sounds like a weird 4/4 to 5/8 rhythm, which technically preserves the total number of quarter notes overall, but it ends with just as much energy as it came in with. I love this entire arrangement of this song, but if I'm honest, I was quite shocked to see that this was the song that was chosen to represent the boss of this DLC. Now, with additional context, I think this was the better choice, but I have some underlying theories as to why I think a different song may have been the original planned song, but I'll get to that later. As a person who seems to love farting glaciers more than the average Risk of Rain fan, I was incredibly happy to see weird artifacts from that song in this song. I can almost guarantee you that the farting glaciers don't have any lore-related bearings on this DLC, its place within the story of the rest of the game, or on this song, but these things sound really cool, so I'll just take my win and move on. It feels like it's been a minute since we've heard this kind of groovy synth, and the melody it's playing is really fun in a way. And I would almost describe it as something that you'd hear in like the end credits of some obscure Japanese game. Not in particular, not even a particular genre, just kind of games from that region, I guess. The chord progression is fairly simple, the drums are also simple, and the rim shot specifically is really nice. Honestly, the rim shots in all these songs are incredible. I don't really know why it took me until the second to last song to point it out, but I just love rim shots. I love the subtle flanger effect added to the drums in certain portions because it only shows up during sections where the drums aren't super busy or during a transition point, which makes them stand out when they appear, but they don't take away from everything else happening in the track. I love this downtime as it's another great transition between the funky synth and the smooth and sexy guitar. I will accept people calling this music elevator music adjacent, because I mostly do agree with it. When you get to this portion though, this is when shit really gets real. This is when like the boss of the song shows up, George Karagiannis, with his crazy mad guitar skills. This is that portion. He came in through the Dark Souls fog mist and his boss theme started playing, and this is it. And I also can't help but hear a noir-adjacent feeling, similar to a song used by another content creator, The Other Frost, when the guitar and bass start playing the same phrase. Even at the time I told him I couldn't justify why I thought that way, I just sort of did. Just watch his Cult Take series and maybe you'll have a better understanding than I did. I could honestly totally imagine the guitarist just playing this portion of the song with his eyes closed. At this point, he's nearing the end of the song, and I don't think he really gives a shit what notes he's actually playing. Not like it really matters, because they all just sound great. He's kind of his own little bubble, and maybe forgot that other people were in the proverbial studio with him, but then eventually the other people in the room realized that he was putting out some hot fire flames and just kind of let him do his thing. I would describe the general flow and the timbre of this guitar as sort of matching the guitar riffs from a boat made out of a sheet of newspaper, in that because this guitar is not nearly as distorted, it does actually fit in with that funk feeling that I initially attributed to the former guitar. think maybe one of the funniest things about this entire arrangement is that it's a lot more chill than every other track in this soundtrack, and yet they chose to throw it into the level that looks the most like actual literal hell. I used to call the Abyssal Depths hell because it was just a large red set of caverns, but this really hits the fire and brimstone thing, which while appropriate for hell, is also equally as appropriate for a hatchery where they're probably hatching dragons or some shit. And wait a minute, why aren't there any dragons in this game? That'd be cool as hell, right? Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, I listened to this soundtrack a couple of times, so by the time I got to this song, I assumed it was the boss theme. It's a little bit more fast-paced than other final boss themes, but that's all well and good because I think it generally fits within the cadence set by the rest of the Seekers of the Storm soundtrack. Some would argue that the crazy guitar pick sweeping and the ridiculous drum patterns are merely an overcompensation for the weak theremin at the beginning, and to those people I say nothing because, frankly, I made them up in my mind just so that I could talk about how all over the place this song sounds at times. And the beginning of that madness starts right here. I think this portion officially solidifies this song as being the one that pulls the most inspiration from Double Fucking Rainbow. Yes, people, I now understand where Face of the Deep comes from, and you're gonna need a bigger ukulele comes from, and where they generally get their main themes. When the song brings back the theremin, they also change the drums to fit within its rhythm, which is one of the weird offset variations of the boss motif. But the thing I want to point to is the guitar, only because its chugging really reminds me of the chugging used in Face of the Deep, which is another small nod that I used to jump to the conclusion that this was meant to be the final boss theme. The first two-thirds of this song kind of just feel like a roller coaster in a sense, where it's constantly just going back and forth, high energy, low energy, build up to Double Fucking Rainbow references, and I think it's a lot of fun, honestly. There's a lot of like fun, fast-paced arps to build up to just the chunkening, as I referenced it earlier, the chunkening, and you know, it's really cool. It doesn't have to like ask much of you, and it doesn't feel nearly as brooding as actual Double Fucking Rainbow. It just feels like a kind of fun take on it. And at this point, once I remove myself from the fact that this is not supposed to be the boss theme, despite my tinfoil hat theory, I can really just appreciate this song for what it is. I can appreciate all the songs in this game for what they are, but especially this one now that I've gotten away from my preconceived notions. The final section also utilizes more stuff from Double Fucking Rainbow, with the crazy guitar riff, the erratic drumming, and most noticeably, the bit crushed marching band snare pattern to let this song fully bleed out into an entire 2-minute long ambient section, which, in hindsight, I don't even think plays when you're fighting the boss because that certainly wouldn't loop very well. This ambient section also moderately reminded me of Lachrymosum in a way, and with the filter-sweeped guitar sounding thing that fades out at the end sounding a lot like the end of Lachrymosum, how it sort of loops you back to the beginning song of the game, Through a Cloud Darkly. I can also very, very faintly hear the beginning of Into the Doldrums and the panning synths, but it's so goddamn faint, I had to come back like 5 times to even notice it. I've laid out everything that made me think that this was supposed to be the final boss theme. But the thing that heavily negated that theory is the fact that Double Fucking Rainbow doesn't even first appear when you're fighting Providence and Risk of Rain 1. It just so happens that no other non-final boss theme has opted to use the motif at all, and my ignorant ass didn't know until I finally beat a round of Risk of Rain Returns. As mentioned before, I think this song doesn't capture enough of the energy of the False Sun, especially not when compared to his actual boss theme, and while I found it hilarious to entertain my tinfoil hat theory, it turns out the best way to crush that theory was to actually do my research and learn about my own material. And that totally isn't a meta commentary on more harmful tinfoil hat theories. I just think that people should stop thinking they know more than professionals just because they read one Google search that they deliberately had to search for and scrounged through like 200 pages of Google articles to find. It's kind of weird that they had the drive to look for this one debunked article, but not the drive to easily find that said article was debunked, much like how I lied out of my ass when it came to Mithrix's theme and the Voidling's theme when all I had to do was play some original Risk of Rain and... What? Dude, I told you to stop the recording. We're done with this portion. We need to move to the end of the video. Okay. I am a little ashamed that I couldn't really catch the bandwagon during the hype days of Secrets of the Storm, but I guess I can't really be that mad because I deliberately chose to drop 2 more videos while I was in the middle of writing about this one. No, seriously, I was literally editing the Deep Rock video at the same time as recording the Balatro video while I was script writing this video, while I've also been working on a new album, and okay, that's enough of that. It's incredibly unfortunate that this DLC was rushed when everyone had incredibly high hopes. It's incredibly unfortunate that a whole host of item reworks had to happen because most of the new items were pretty uninspired at the time, but hey, the music world was eating good when this new soundtrack dropped. As I've mentioned a couple of times, it was kind of a chore to get into the Secrets of the Storm soundtrack because of my own biases towards the original soundtrack, my own biases against A Placid Place of Ignorance, and because for some reason I just have this really weird aversion to listening to new music for games that I've covered because people just know me as the music guy, but I don't really want to listen to the music just because it's a part of my job, which is why I still haven't fully listened to the Ultra Kill Encore music yet. That said, when it comes to the Secrets of the Storm now, my bias against PPI doesn't influence my decision anymore because I simply like these songs' use of the motif more than the original song that they derived it from. That part was also recorded way before all of the vinyls showed up, and so I opened the Secrets of the Storm one because I was so genuinely curious. And right here at the beginning it says I started with 3 concepts. First, expand on the Placid Island theme from Survivors of the Void. Check. Without this, without this context, I don't think I ever would have understood exactly why he chose to expand on this, but this does further prove that that was the intent the entire time. The state of the game no longer influences my decision because I'm one of those weirdos who will go through egregiously long stretches of time only listening to video game soundtracks, so I don't have to experience the quirks that come with the Secrets of the Storm gameplay just to coincidentally listen to the music. And I am slowly opening up to actually listening to the new music from IPs that I like because, whether I like it or not, it's gonna get talked about and I might as well get the ball rolling myself. I also wanted to avoid general issues that came up in previous soundtracks like the majority of Ultra Kill's Act 1 and The Face of the Deep in Risk of Rain 2, with the former example showing my complete lack of foresight that I might need to actually fully write out an idea, and the latter example showing that I really need to listen to the music a lot before I open my fucking mouth. Look, Face of the Deep enjoyers, I'm really sorry that I didn't do this song justice, and it's almost karmic justice in a way, because now that I've decided to listen to it, I was blown away with just how much I loved the song, and just how much I loved the portions that I didn't cover in the video. But in summation, in a game with a soundtrack that bangs harder than any other game's soundtrack has banged, Secrets of the Storm's addition to this catalog not only keeps that ball rolling, but almost single-handedly rolls the ball itself. It's all gas, no brakes, it's 42 minutes and 36 seconds of unadulterated hot fire flames, and it will certainly leave a mark on this game's legacy for years to come. I'm genuinely hoping for a video later down the line of Chris breaking down this soundtrack like he did with the other 2, although I'm not gonna hold my breath because I know he's onto bigger and better things. I mean, I don't know what could be bigger and better than the Risk of Rain series, but I trust his judgment.
Don't